Hey everyone, welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This week we're diving into a fascinating forest bird, the varied thrush. If you've ever wandered through the deep mossy conifer forests of the Pacific Northwest, you might have heard their haunting single-note whistling echo. These birds are usually right at home along the west coast, from Alaska down through Northern California, which is why things get very interesting when a varied thrush recently showed up all the way in New York. So today, where we talk a lot about vagrancy, why some birds wander far outside of their typical range. Along the way, we also drift into some fascinating side conversations about sampling methods, how researchers collect data from poop, and what those approaches can tell us. And stick around because we've got a fun announcement about an upcoming episode that you won't want to miss. All right, time to grab our binoculars and let's get into it. All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the varied thrush, which we're excited about. And Shannon, this was a bird that you picked for the episode. Do you want to kick it off with the varied thrush before we all jump in?
I picked varied thrush because I wanted to go home, and I can't physically go home right now. So I'm virtually going home and talking about a bird that I had kind of forgotten about in a little way till there was a Vagrant report from New York at the beginning of November. I sent you guys a picture of it, and the picture of that bird just reminded me of
recently
how beautiful it is. And no offense, but how boring Hermit and Swainson's things like that thrushes are compared to thrushes, other thrushes.
You're right.
But anyways, so I picked this bird because it reminds me of going to school in Victoria on Vancouver Island. It is a not uncommon bird there, and it is, for me, it is has a very strong place memory in my mind. And that is that you see it in the dark parts of the forest, not at the edges of forests, but it is a part of, the kind of rainforesty-like, but inside the rainforesty-like aspects of the Pacific Northwest. And that's where you're going to see them. So it's the way it sounds. RJ, you could play its song, but the way it sounds is absolutely, for sure, something that is kind of haunting and ethereal. And then it's a monotypic genus, which is really pretty cool. We can talk about that in a minute, but
is that coming through?
We need some evergreen trees in the background for somebody to kind of get the.
So cool.
It is so cool. Wow.
Yeah, it makes you feel like you're kind of alone with nature, because it's not a common bird in this. I mean, it's not an uncommon bird, but there's not a group of them at one time around each other. So it's like a solo spiritual kind of weird experience, at least for me, to see them. Not to mention they have really interesting scaly feathers that are this almost like an iridescent-y, grayish, bluish color, and there's incredible orange bits and pieces all over it, very vivid orange colors. So
I was just going to take it the another direction with respect to sort of how you see it. And so, like you were saying, it's a bird that's breeds from Alaska down into California in the mountains, in these forests. And that's its entire distribution. And my experience with it is that it's migratory. So the populations migrate out of Alaska. And as Shannon was saying, they if you look at the eBird record map, there are records all the way across eastern North America, the northeastern part of North America.
Really?
So
Yeah.
they're not a common vagrant, but single individuals tend to show up, and it's actually there's some evidence that it's a 2 to 5 year cycle where they have population fluctuations, and that drives individuals to go out of range. And so it's definitely these are vagrants, but there are a lot of these vagrants.
When you look at its range,
it's such a far away.
It hugs the coast so dramatically. But it's been found in every Canadian province except Newfoundland. has been found in almost all of the U.S. There's been a record of a varied thrush, but it's not I don't know, it's not a bird you would a priori think that would be like that if you saw it in nature, because it's so kind of solitary. You don't think, okay, well, this bird's just going to pick up from this deep, dark habitat where it doesn't like to go anywhere else. It doesn't like to be at the edges of that habitat, and it's going to haul itself off to New York. Come on, that's crazy.
Why?
It's going to go to somewhere in the Great Plains. What?
There's been one within 2 miles of us a number of winters ago in Evanston. Yeah,
really?
No, they show up, and
I had read about the one in New York, but I didn't know that it was, a little more common for them to have that kind of vagrancy. That is wild.
Yeah, so they're called eruptive, which means that periodically there are just large population increases, either because there was some boom cycle in breeding, which I don't think it's that much. It's like all of a sudden a bunch of them are flocking and going somewhere, and so you see these these dramatic increases in populations for a short period of time, and then you don't. Nobody knows why. This bird is very enigmatic, and especially because it is so solo and where it's found, it's not the easiest bird in the world to actually study. So we know actually very little about it, very little about what it does on migration. One of the things that I read talked about it being something called a leapfrog pattern in evolutionary biology, which is that things in the north are found in the farthest south. So the northern ones the northern ones on the breeding grounds have the southernmost distribution on their wintering grounds. So it's leapfrogging over all of the intermediate populations and going further south, which, I mean, who knows why? I don't know why. Why would it do that, John?
Because of competition with the ones in between.
Yeah, they're kind of ferociously territorial on the wintering grounds. Yeah, they're known for being really confrontational on the wintering grounds.
Yeah,
of course, that's not my
reading that they would like
with them.
chase. Oh, that they'll chase away other birds at feeders, and like it said they'll even dominate like sparrows and blackbirds and cowbirds and towhees. And
Oh, wow.
I don't think of a lot of things as dominating sparrows. They kind of hold their ground.
Yeah. I'd be willing to have my feeder be dominated by a varied thrush.
Yes. I couldn't believe just how pretty they were when I wasn't familiar with them until Shannon, you kind of sent us that article about the Vagrant, and thrushes are hard for Amanda and I to, it's like, we've taken a year to figure out a lot of our warblers, and, sparrows we're learning, and those are hard. And then this past year we've been learning thrushes, and we're like, how do people tell these things apart? And then when you said the varied thrush, I thought it was just going to be some, like, look like all the other thrushes. And I was like,
Brown and white.
Yeah. I was like, wow, this is a gorgeous bird. And why can't all thrushes be this easy to identify?
Exactly.
They'd all be in
there is
monotypic genera if that were the case.
Well, as Shannon's saying, it's definitely different enough that they put it in its own genus, but the things that it's next to in the linear classifications and things like birds of the world are some really bizarre thrushes that include some really colorful things called cochoas from Southeast Asia. And so it's interesting. And at the same time, I mean, a lot of times when it shows up someplace in the eastern U.S., it's with robins. And so when you get a group of 50 robins and there's one varied thrush in the middle somewhere, they can be kind of hard to pick out.
Yeah.
But John, they historically were classified in Zoothera, but they're not with those things phylogenetically. They're at the base. They're at the
right. No, exactly.
base, the base of the American part of the tree of life. So but they're way at the base, and then biogeographically, by putting them there, it seems to me they could be in this category with things like wren tit, verdant. We're doing this class for the graduate students right now called which we call Birds of the World, where basically they go through the collection and
and try to learn all the current taxonomy from orders and families. And so, yeah, it's interesting to think about how closely related varied thrush is to everything else in North America. And what you're saying is it's part of the same clade, right, Janet?
Yeah, it's at the
same
base of
grouping.
that group. So its scientific
Of all-
name is
of all-
Ixorius, and the species name is Navius. And it has a bit of a convoluted taxonomic history too, because it doesn't look like anything. People didn't know how to put it, but it turns out when you actually get the tree right, or you get the tree more detailed, the biogeography, where these things evolved and how they got around the world becomes a lot more clear than it used to be. The taxonomy, the way it used to be, made it unclear where these birds came from and how they got around. But it turns out there are not as many cross-regional, like between the old world and the new world. There are not as many of those transitions as previous taxonomies would suggest. So that's an interesting thing about, when you know the tree, you start to understand a lot better where these birds came from. And then when you understand the relationships and how genetically distinct they are, you can start to get an idea of the timing. How long does it take in that group to develop a plumage that's so unique? We have 132 of them in our collections. It includes skins, and almost all of them are skins because, hey, why wouldn't you? Skeletons, there's a few mounts and some eggs, but I don't think there's a pickle, John.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me because I'm going to guess all of those. I'm going to guess almost all of those come from, well, most of them I'll bet are coming from the summer months when early collectors went up there. We probably haven't had one come into the museum in 50 to 70 years is my guess.
Oh, wow.
To me, they're fascinating, like on the breeding grounds, because they have fairly large territories. So they're not like robins where you can just hear 7 or 8 outside your window at night during the summer.
That's why they're kind of a haunting solo endeavor when you see them. Yeah, it feels like you're very aware of how nice the habitat of where you are is when you see them. So you're not going to see them in a parking lot. Oh, well, maybe you do when they're in a vagrant state. I don't know about that, but if you're on Vancouver Island, you're not going to see them in the parking lot. You're going to see them, in these beautiful, unique forests.
And I think that's what makes it so interesting to me that they wander like they do.
Yeah.
And because they are such a denizen of these tall old growth forests.
There was a female in Russia, John, in 1983. A female in Russia.
Wow.
And a strangely colored individual in Cornwall in the UK in 1982 that hung out for a while. Think about that. That's bizarre.
Wait, in the UK?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I take from that is the word strangely colored made people think that maybe it got there some other way than actually flying on its own.
You mean it was released? Some kind of breeding, smuggling thing?
Yeah, except that I can't imagine why anybody would have a captive varied thrush anywhere. So
I had to look up its name. So Ixorius is ancient Greek. Ixios, however you spell it. I guess there are no ancient Greek people around to correct me. But it refers to mistletoe berries, which is what it eats in the wintering ground, not what it eats when in breeding season, it's eating insects largely. And then the Navius is birthmark or mole, so it's a reflection of the kind of the brightly colored and the kind of the scallopy kinds of edges to those bluish grayish feathers. And hence the varied thrush. So the varied comes from all the different kinds of colors and patterns it has in its plumage. So now you can all feel like you've been to the Pacific Northwest. You can feel yourself inside of a dark forest.
Nice.
Hearing that sound.
I have a question about the vagrancy. I feel like vagrancies we've talked about with other birds is kind of going north to south, like they'll kind of overshoot or, their migration.
Right.
Is it common for vagrants to go like this? Kind of seems like they're all almost at the same level, but just going east, or the one in Russia is going west. Like, is that unique for vagrants to be traveling that far, but on the same
So
level?
I think this is a really great thing to talk about for this particular bird, because one of the things that was pointed out in the stuff I was reading was that they breed all the way up basically to the to timberline in Alaska, for instance. So that gets them very far north, and so they were suggesting, coming back to Shannon's comment about the migratory populations, those populations are much more migratory than the birds from California. And I think the thought is that a lot of those birds that are showing up in the eastern US are actually really just kind of migrating south, southeast a little more to end up in places like New York. And so it's not as much that they go straight west. Although now that I'm saying that, they're found in a lot of they've shown up in a lot of provinces in northern Canada on the coast too, in various places. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's been hypotheses over the years that if your migration is hardwired to go north south, that maybe you could have essentially somehow developmentally you could have your internal compass shifted 90 degrees, which would get you going in an east-west direction. But I reading up on this, it made me feel like maybe that's a real overstatement. And coming back to something Shannon said, the way to study that would be to have information about where these birds in the eastern U.S. are actually coming from. And there's some minor plumage differences such that they're two subspecies recognized. But even that is, and I'm guessing the ones from Alaska are from one subspecies, which is the coastal form. But then there's an internal west or east of the Rockies form that's weakly differentiated. And so maybe you could tell them apart if you did that. But I don't know how much, whether people have been able to. I don't know whether there are any genetic samples, for instance, from anywhere of the birds coming to the East Coast. And so I don't think it's really been looked into.
Yeah, there have been several banded, none recovered, so you don't get a clue about that. We know one of them lived for at least 4 years and 9 months, so typical kind of elderly songbirds, nothing unusual or different about that. But because a bird is so hard to study, if you wanted to band a bunch of them, it would be super hard. You would be climbing over, it would physically be really hard to band enough of them. So in order to recover one, not that many birds are ever recovered that are banded, but you're not going to go out in a day and you're going to be happy if you band 3 birds. And you're going to be tired, and you're going to have climbed over a lot of mountains and logs and trees.
I was going to put a plug in here for a big atlas that's just come out after being in preparation for a long time, which is basically taking all the data on banding returns from the breeding bird lab that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service runs. So this has just come out in the last couple weeks.
Is it actually out, John?
It is out.
Okay.
Yeah, it's out. Yeah. And Pete Mara, who's a good friend of ours, oversaw the development of this and putting together all these data. But varied thrush would be an example, as Shannon's saying, of a bird that there are almost no banding returns for because they're not that easy to recapture. Now, in a world where you could put transmitters on things, I bet that you could go out and learn something from tracking the birds using transmitters these days, which would be really interesting to do.
I know you said that like there aren't very many or the specimens at the Field Museum. They're all like 150 to 100 years old at least. Like, do vagrants typically kind of never are recovered, right? Or once there is a bird that's been spotted somewhere, it's like. I mean, it's not often that would end up in a museum, right?
It depends.
Okay.
I mean, no, I mean, if you think about it, sometimes vagrants are in really bad shape. And, you know, one of the examples I always use, if you look at eBird of ancient murrelet, which is this crazy seabird that has a tendency to have individuals once in a while come across North America. And a lot of those have been birds that have been found really weak or and not survived, and so that they end up in a collection. So there are things like that. We've been. It's interesting. One of our graduate students is working on these martins, the genus Progny, and we have an 1890s specimen of a Progny martin that was connected in Key West, and morphologically it looks like a population of southern Argentinian breeding Progny swallows, and this bird just overshot massively. So normally they winter in northern South America, and this bird showed up in Key West. And she's just been able to show, coming back to Shannon talking about topaz, that genetically that bird absolutely is one of these southern migrants. And so every once in a while you do get a lot of information from an individual like that, but not always. And nowadays, sometimes the birders have done things like watch birds poop and then gone and gotten poop samples from a given vagrant to try to figure out exactly what it is.
Oh, wow.
This
That's interesting. Yeah. What could a bird's poop tell you? Like, what all could it tell you?
you could get a genome from a good poop sample. As crazy as that
Wow.
seems, yeah.
That's crazy.
You can also get the genomes of whatever it ate.
Oh, cool.
But there have been situations, for instance, where there are these two kingbirds, Couch's kingbird and tropical kingbird. So these two kingbirds are super similar, such that in their definitely geographically they have different geographic breeding ranges, but they can be vagrants, and so vagrants have shown up, for instance, in Michigan, where people have wondered, is it a Couch's kingbird or is it a tropical kingbird? What they've done is they've watched the bird sitting places and got a poop sample and been able to verify through DNA what species the bird is. So yeah,
That's
no,
awesome.
Cool.
yeah.
That reminds me of like police work, or like when you watch 2020, they always like get someone's like drink or their cigarette,
It's
True.
like to solve a crime.
Just wait for them to
You've been
leave.
watching
And
Law and Order.
You got it, Shannon. That's crazy. Wait, this is weird, but could you get a human's genome from their poop?
Yes, 100%.
Oh, wow.
I don't think that's
I
ever
mean,
been
in
on the
fact-
crime shows.
But for me, the interest.
He's gonna
There's
say
no Law and
that
Order
seems
with
like
that?
an easy one.
No, in the context of COVID, the wastewater sampling has been really critical in understanding the development of virus, the kind of strains of viruses, their geographic distributions, their ebbings and flowings. And in fact, there's you can follow some of these people on Twitter, and I've been following them since right at the very beginning of COVID, because at the very beginning of COVID, it became clear that the things that we do in the museum and the trees of life we get were going to be critical to understanding where COVID came from, despite all the political nonsense about it being a lab leak. It's not a lab leak. No, this is not a real thing. Pseudoscience. It came from the wildlife in the market in Wuhan. There's no question in my mind that that's what happened, and that's what the data and analyses by reputable people suggest. But so people, especially, it was hard to capture snapshots, especially as the U.S. government stopped keeping track and stopped testing. So the only way we know things now about COVID is through wastewater testing. So there are scientists who, and that's only gotten worse in the last, 10 months. Shocking. When a lot of things have been shut down. And so a lot of science things have been shut off. But a lot of universities have picked up the slack in doing this wastewater testing. And like maybe a year into COVID, there was someone who had a unique, rare variant, and you could see it in the wastewater in 2 places in Ohio. So the person lived in one place and worked in another, and you could, through the
Oh my
wastewater,
gosh.
trace this this variant, and it becomes really important because that person was clearly infected, whether they knew it or not. Who knows, right? Because it's not, you don't know the individual, but that individual was clearly long-term affected and was not clearing that virus from its system. And now we know what the consequences of that are. Those are the kinds of people where the virus is replicating a lot in one person, and when it does that, it has a chance to make a lot of variants. Some of them can have properties that are not very good for human health, and some of them, if you cannot clear that virus, we know now that it lives, pieces of it, spike proteins and things like that, live all over, including in your brain. And this is a major aspect of long COVID, is trying to understand now the inflammatory effects that this virus and its particles being kind of all over your body, and what the long-term effects of that are. So some of the HIV treatments are being looked at for potential helping people with long COVID. Some of the anti-inflammatory aspects of things like GLP-1 drugs. Now people are being prescribed GLP-1 drugs to see if they can't kind of lower the inflammation and maybe clear the virus, help the body clear the virus out of all the pieces that it's in. So, and we're only going to need more of this because the U.S., the world, is not treating this virus with the respect that it deserves. And we're creating probably a whole generation of kids who are going to have really serious problems because the dogma was that kids don't get it, and if they do, it's not that big of a deal for them. Yeah, and maybe some of them don't get super sick, but that virus is persisting in their bodies, and we're seeing now large instances of increases in cancer that could be linked to things like that, memory, ADHD, learning disabilities that are not from being isolated, because the reality is that kids weren't that isolated for that long. So
I'm envisioning a pilot program where we can take Varied Thrush and create a whole crime series associated with genetic
series?
and genomic work on birds.
Amanda can collect the poop.
There we go.
Yes. Yes. Anything for a crime series, I will do it.
John Mott brought me back from the brink. But what we need a vaccine that prevents the virus from entering their cells and from them giving it to other people. And there is some in development, but we need to put a lot more money into that so that we stop the virus from having the ability to mutate and create strains that are, even more deadly than the ones we already have, and create a new pandemic on top of the pandemics we're still experiencing. As many people died this week as died 4 years ago. We just don't hear about them anymore.
That's scary.
Mind blowing.
Yeah.
But circling back, I mean, to me, the crazy thing is how much technology we have to effectively address and understand some of these things. And again.
Yeah. So if we can do that, we can figure out where varied thrushes are going.
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go. Full circle.
Yeah. With some DNA work, we can, scan the populations through time, just like our graduate student Jo is doing with these swallows that she's working on, which every time she gets new data show us something different that we didn't know. Makes an already complicated story more complicated, somewhat inexplicable, and in need of more data. So most science is like that. It creates a lot more questions that need a lot more data, a lot more analytical tools, and a large number of people working together to put different brain powers together on a particular question. So that's why Jo's research has got a bunch of different kinds of people in it. And the COVID research has all different kinds of people that are involved in it who attack this problem from a lot of different angles. And that, I think that's what modern science is. So that's why people like me need to be trained in how to manage groups of people and budgets and things like that, which we're not, We actually don't even get teacher training in graduate school for the most part. You can take courses like that.
That explains so much.
But, I mean, one day...
Not about you guys, but about teachers in college.
No, but one day you're taking a class, and the next day you're teaching it. No special knowledge was given to you about what that would look like. You have to figure it out on your own. So it is kind of weird when you think about it.
That's
like
crazy.
that. In fact, when John and I don't know if it happened to you, John, but when I first went to LSU as a graduate student, and you're going to be a TA there, that's how we made money. And orientation had the only thing they taught you about teaching in orientation is what to do if someone cheated. That's it.
That's it?
That's it.
That's all you need to know.
That's the only training. And basically the rules were such that under no circumstances were you going to really be able to accuse anyone of cheating, because it had to be independently observed by X number of people or whatever it was. You're like, okay, well, this is it. So, and that's it.
That's worthless.
So you kind of figure it out as you go along, or don't, as you probably saw plenty of professors who don't figure it out.
Exactly. That's really interesting.
That's one of the advantages of being in the museum, is that we talk to lots of different kinds of people, and that teaches you how to use plain language, or it should teach you how to use plain language with people.
Well, I think we're getting close on time with this one. Before we wrap it up, though, so we want to do something in a couple weeks. We're going to do a movie review of Listers, which John and Shannon, you have not seen it yet. Is that right?
We started watching it. We started watching it last night.
Okay. How far
So
did
it's
you
on
get?
YouTube. It's on
I think
YouTube.
we got 2/3
everyone.
of the way through.
Okay.
It's freely available on YouTube. So
yeah.
Watch it and
everybody
send us
that's
some
listening,
questions.
go watch it. It's a wild story. It's these two guys that are they're filmmakers, but they live out of their van and decide that they're gonna do a big year and or a U.S. big year in the lower 48. And you kind of slowly see the process of them not knowing anything about birds whatsoever to actually, I think they finish in like the top 5 in the big year by the end of it or something. They're two total characters though that you think are kind of these we talked about preparing a jay. I think these guys prepare a lot of jays, but they're wildly entertaining. And it's funny to see because by the end of it, it's like they're actually really, really knowledgeable. And so and I think the filmmaking is really interesting too. The way they tell the storytelling's really good. The cinematography's really good. And it's funny. So we'll see what people think when they watch it. And you can, write us though at podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. Send us your questions. We'll do a review of it and we'll read your questions.
Or
in a couple
comments.
Weeks, so.
Or comments.
Yeah.
This is not
anything you want.
Think about
This
it.
is not a normal movie, right?
No, by no means.
So
Wait. Define normal.
it gives you perhaps too much of an insight into to us and who we work with
there's a
and
part
our
I
friends.
can't wait to talk about with you guys. Yeah.
So, like
It's going to be for
looking
some
at
fun
it,
discussion.
two young guys, but you look at it, you're like, am I looking in a mirror?